The evening began with a soft glow spreading across the hall of the large estate, the kind of place people only saw in magazines. The garden lights outside shimmered through the tall glass windows, and the sound of guests greeting each other blended into a polite hum. Everyone was dressed in their best clothes, trying their hardest to fit into the millionaire's glamorous world. Most people didn't come because they wanted to. They came because they had to. It was one of those company gatherings where presence mattered more than comfort. Among the crowd was a quiet employee who had arrived early to help set things up. She moved carefully around the hall, placing folders on the registration table, adjusting small details, and making sure everything looked perfect. She didn't stand out, and she certainly didn't try to. She simply wanted to do her job well and avoid any unnecessary attention. But as she worked, she hummed softly without noticing it, letting an old tune slip out while she organized the papers. The tune wasn't anything dramatic. It was gentle and familiar, something she used to play long ago before life pulled her in a different direction. The melody comforted her in small moments like this, helping her keep her nerves calm in a place where she always felt invisible. But her humming didn't stay unnoticed for long. The millionaire himself walked in earlier than expected. People usually knew when he entered a room because the atmosphere shifted. Conversations softened. Faces straightened. His presence demanded attention, even when he said nothing. Tonight was no different. When he stepped inside, he scanned the hall with the confidence of someone who owned more than just a big house. He owned the power that controlled everyone's place in the room. His eyes landed on the employee still, arranging the folders. He walked closer, not because he cared about the work, but because he heard something he didn't expect, her humming. He raised an eyebrow, as if the sound bothered him. "What's this?" he asked in a tone that felt more like a challenge than a question. She froze for a moment, realizing he was talking to her. "Sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to make noise." "Noise?" he repeated with a smirk. "I thought maybe you were trying to perform for the guests." She shook her head quickly. "No, sir. I was just working." He looked her over, amused. "Do you play piano or something?" he asked, though he didn't seem genuinely interested. It was more like he wanted to give her a moment of discomfort, a small reminder that he was in charge, and she was just another employee. She hesitated. "I used to. A long time ago." "Used to," he repeated, pretending to think deeply. "Interesting. So you think you still have some skill?" She didn't know how to answer that. The truth was, she had no idea if she could still play the way she once did. Life had changed too much since then. Before she could respond, a few guests approached the area, drawn by the millionaire's voice. He noticed their attention and immediately played into it. "Everyone," he said lightly. "Seems our hard-working staff member here used to be a pianist." The guests smiled politely, not sure what to make of the comment. Some looked at her with mild curiosity, others with the kind of expression people give when they expect something amusing to happen. The millionaire glanced across the hall, where a grand white piano stood near the center. It wasn't there by accident. He liked to show off, even if he rarely touched the instrument himself. "Well then," he said, pointing toward it, "why don't you give us a little performance?" Her heart dropped. She hadn't expected anything like that. All she had done was hum. Now suddenly, she was being pushed in front of a growing audience. "I don't think," she began softly, but he raised a hand to cut her off. "Come now," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't be shy. It's just a simple song. Surely someone who used to play can manage that." The guests chuckled, not out of cruelty, but because they didn't know what else to do. They followed the millionaire's lead like people usually did. She felt heat rise in her face. She had tried so hard to stay unnoticed, yet here she was, being pulled into the very center of the room. It felt unfair, uncomfortable, and unnecessary. But refusing wasn't an option. Not here. Not in front of him. Slowly, she took a breath and nodded. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The millionaire gestured toward the piano proudly, as though he personally arranged this moment for the guests' entertainment. He expected a disaster. She could see it in the way he leaned back, arms crossed, ready to enjoy the show. She walked through the hall, each step feeling heavier than the last. The polished floor reflected the lights above, and for a moment she caught sight of herself small, nervous, completely out of place. She wanted to disappear, but everyone's eyes were already on her. When she reached the piano, she touched the glossy surface, trying to calm her shaking hands. She had once spent hours at a piano like this, practicing late into the night, pouring all her thoughts and feelings into the keys. But those days felt so distant now. She sat down slowly, trying not to draw more attention. Her fingers hovered above the keys, and the room fell silent. Even the small whispers stopped. It was as if the entire hall held its breath. Her mind filled with old memories, her childhood, teacher tapping rhythm gently on the side of the piano, the sound of her family listening proudly during small home recitals, the feeling of losing herself in music when life felt too heavy. But then came the memory she couldn't shake the day everything changed, the moment she had to let go of music because reality demanded something different. She had never told anyone at work about her past. It felt too personal, too distant. And now, standing in front of a crowd with all eyes on her, she felt as though they were looking into a part of her life she wasn't ready to share. The millionaire tapped his watch loudly. "Any day now?" he said, just loud enough for everyone to hear. A soft wave of embarrassment hit her, but she pulled herself together. She had been pressured before in life. She had faced worse than this moment. If she could survive all that, she could survive playing one song. She placed her fingers on the keys gently. The piano felt familiar and strange at the same time. She didn't know if her hands remembered what to do. She didn't know if she remembered what to feel. For a moment, nothing happened. Just silence. People waited. Some leaned forward. A few exchanged looks. And then finally, she pressed the first key. The note was soft and unsure, like a question. She pressed another, and then another. The melody didn't flow smoothly at first. It was stiff, awkward, almost hesitant. She felt her cheeks warm as a few guests whispered again, but she kept going. Even if she stumbled, she had started, and she couldn't stop halfway. Her hands trembled, but she continued pressing one key after another, trying to find the old rhythm she once knew so well. She closed her eyes for a moment and breathed in slowly. And somewhere inside that breath, something shifted. Her fingers found a familiar sequence. The hesitant taps became a gentle pattern. A small spark of recognition passed through her hands, as if they remembered more than her mind did. She continued, letting her fingers search through fragments of an old song she loved. She didn't think about the millionaire, or the guests or the hall. She focused on the piano, on the small sound vibrating through the room, on the memory of who she used to be. People watched as her playing slowly grew steadier. She didn't notice their faces, but she didn't need to. All she knew was that she wasn't completely frozen anymore. She wasn't drowning in fear. She was playing. The millionaire's expression shifted slightly. He hadn't expected her to even get through the first few notes. He had assumed she would give up or embarrass herself, so he could laugh it off in front of everyone. But she was still going, still trying, still finding her way. And though she didn't know it yet, this moment was only the beginning. The room was silent now, the kind of silence that grows right before something surprising happens. What began as a forced act meant to embarrass her was turning into something else. Something none of them saw coming. She continued playing softly, unaware that the night was about to change not only her place in the room, but her place in her own life. The room stayed quiet as she played those soft, shaky notes, and for a moment it felt as if time had slowed down. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips, each beat sending a small tremble through her hands. She didn't dare look at the faces watching her. Instead, she kept her eyes on the keys, letting the feeling of the smooth surface guide her. But as she played, her mind drifted back to a time when sitting at a piano didn't feel frightening. She remembered being younger, sitting in a small living room with dim lights, practicing with all the windows open so the fresh air could drift in. Music had once been the only place where she felt completely herself. Back then, she didn't have a job to worry about, bills to pay, or expectations to meet. Life was simpler. She could sit for hours, playing the same piece again and again without getting tired. But that time was gone. She had left it behind because she needed to survive in the real world. Dreams didn't pay rent. Music didn't buy groceries. And so she buried that part of her life deep inside, telling herself it was just the way things had to be. Now, sitting on the polished bench in front of hundreds of judging eyes, she wondered if she should have held on to it longer. Maybe if she had stayed connected to music, she wouldn't feel so lost right now. Maybe she would have something to lean on when moments like this came. Her fingers stumbled again on a small run of notes, and she winced. She heard a quiet whisper from somewhere behind her. She didn't know if it was a laugh or a comment, but it made her shoulders tighten. She wasn't used to being watched, especially not like this. The millionaire stood off to the side with a drink in his hand, watching her with a mixture of amusement and impatience. His lips were curved into a faint smile, the type of smile people wear when they expect something funny to happen. He didn't bother hiding the fact that he thought she would fail. It was right there on his face, as clear as the crystal glass he held. But she kept going. Slowly, carefully, she searched for the rhythm inside the old tune she loved. She didn't have the confidence she once had, but she had the memory. And memories, even old ones, had a way of waking up when you needed them most. As she pressed a few more keys, her mind traveled to the last time she played in front of anyone. It had been years ago. She remembered the nervousness, the excitement, and the feeling of pride afterward. Back then, she didn't know she would one day sit in a stranger's mansion, playing under pressure as a way to avoid being humiliated. She took a small breath and let her hands rest lightly on the keys for a second before continuing. The sound that followed was still quiet, but it had a little more steadiness. The melody was soft but meaningful, like someone whispering a story only a few people in the world could understand. Some of the guests leaned in without realizing it. They hadn't expected much from the moment, but something in the way she played caught their attention. It wasn't loud or showy. It wasn't perfect. But it was sincere. As she played, her body relaxed just a little. The tension in her shoulders eased. Her breaths became steadier. She felt the familiar pull of music inside her, the way it wrapped around her thoughts and softened the noise of the world. She had forgotten how comforting it felt to let her fingers move on their own. The millionaire noticed the shift, too. His smile faded slightly. He was expecting a quick failure, a moment where she froze or played off key. Instead, she continued, her playing growing smoother with every passing second. He stepped closer, pretending to examine the piano, but really he wanted to see her face. He wanted to be sure she wasn't just pretending. But all he saw was someone lost in a piece of music she clearly knew well. She didn't look confident, but she didn't look afraid anymore either. The room remained silent except for the soft sound of the piano. Even the waitstaff stopped walking for a moment to listen. The guests standing nearby glanced at each other, unsure of how to react. They had been told this would be amusing, something lighthearted to laugh about. But the longer she played, the less it felt like a joke. Her mind shifted again, drifting into pieces of her past she hadn't touched in years. She remembered the small competitions she joined when she was younger, the long practices, the days she thought she would one day study music full-time. She remembered her teacher encouraging her, telling her she had something special. She remembered believing it, but then reality had stepped in. When her life changed, when she had to grow up faster than she expected, music became a luxury she couldn't afford. First she took on one job, then another. Soon her days were full of tasks that left little room for anything else. Piano slowly faded out of her routine until it became just a memory. The piece she played now was one of the few she still remembered. Not because she practiced it often, but because it had stayed with her emotionally. It reminded her of a time she still cherished. She finished the first section of the tune, and for a brief moment she hesitated, unsure if she should go on. She could stop now. No one would blame her. She had already played more than anyone expected, but something inside her insisted she keep going, like a small voice telling her that this moment wasn't meant to be short. She didn't know where that feeling came from, but she trusted it. Her fingers moved again, this time with more certainty. The next part of the melody flowed from her almost naturally. It wasn't perfect, but it carried emotion in every note. She didn't think about technique or mistakes. She let her heart guide her hands. Guests who had been whispering earlier were now silent. Some even seemed touched by the softness of the music. It wasn't flashy, but it made them feel something genuine. The millionaire shifted his weight, no longer as comfortable as before. He didn't like losing control of a moment he created. He didn't expect her to turn the situation around, even in a small way. She kept her eyes focused on the piano keys, too afraid that looking up would break the tiny bubble she had found inside herself. She didn't want to see anyone's face, not the guests, not the waiters, and definitely not the millionaires. Right now, the piano was the only safe place she had. Her playing grew warmer. She didn't realize it, but the room had stopped feeling so cold. People weren't looking at her with pity anymore. They were watching with curiosity, maybe, even respect. She continued playing until she reached a soft part of the piece that almost sounded like a whisper. She let the notes fade slowly, her hands moving with caution. Once she played the last sound of that phrase, she paused. The silence that followed felt heavier than the silence before she started. It was a thoughtful silence, like everyone was absorbing something unexpected. She breathed out slowly, her hands still resting above the keys. She wasn't done yet, but she needed a moment. Her heart was racing in her chest again, but this time not because of fear. She felt a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty. For the first time, she allowed herself a quick glance toward the guests. She didn't see laughter. She didn't see mockery. She saw surprise. Some had their eyebrows slightly raised. Others had softened expressions, as if they were seeing a part of her they never imagined existed. She looked away before anyone could make eye contact with her. But the small glance was enough to shake her. Something was changing. She lifted her hands again, preparing to continue when the millionaire spoke. "Well," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. It seems she remembers a little more than she claimed. His tone wasn't kind. It was sharp, as if he were trying to take back the attention she had gained. But the guests didn't laugh this time. Some simply looked at him, then back at her. His comment didn't feel as strong as before. She swallowed hard and pressed the next key. She wouldn't let his words pull her back into fear. She had already climbed out of that feeling once tonight. She wasn't going back. As she began playing again, something inside her solidified. This wasn't just about surviving embarrassment anymore. It was about reclaiming a part of herself she had lost. Her fingers moved with stronger intention now, the melody becoming more emotional. She poured into the keys everything she had held inside, every stress, every memory, every quiet dream she once had, and without knowing it, she was drawing the entire room into her world. The millionaire watched, no longer amused. He didn't understand how the moment had slipped away from him. He didn't know how someone so quiet, someone he underestimated, had turned a simple request into something deeper. She played until her hands reached the end of the second part of the piece, and the final notes floated through the hall like a soft breath. She wasn't finished yet, but everyone in the room could already feel it. Something unexpected was unfolding, something none of them saw coming when the night began, and this was only the beginning of the change that would silence the room, shake the millionaire's confidence, and alter her life in ways she never imagined. She sat there for a moment after finishing the last soft note of the second section, her hands still hovering over the keys. Her breath felt uneven, not because she was nervous like before, but because something inside her had started to wake up, something she thought she had lost forever. The room stayed quiet, as if everyone was waiting to see what she would do next. She could almost feel their eyes on her back. Her chest rose and fell slowly, as if she were trying to steady herself before moving into the next part of the piece. She knew this third section well. It was the part of the melody that had always made her feel strong, even when she was young. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was honest. It had a heartbeat. And she had always loved that. She gently pressed the first key of the third section, and something shifted the moment the sound came out. The note wasn't shaky like the ones she began with. It was steady, warm, almost confident. She didn't force it. It just came naturally. The guests felt the difference too. Even from behind her, she could sense it, the subtle movement of people leaning in, the soft sigh of someone who hadn't expected the moment to feel so emotional. It wasn't the kind of attention she feared earlier. It felt different, like they were actually listening. Her hands moved slowly at first, but the longer she played, the more the music grew inside her. Her fingers remembered patterns she didn't know she could still recall. They glided across the keys, not perfectly, but with purpose. She didn't know how long she played before the room began to fade away again. The guests, the mansion, the heavy silence, they all disappeared in the background. All she could feel was the piano beneath her fingers, the piece she had grown up with, and the small spark inside her that was turning into something brighter. The millionaire, who had been watching with crossed arms and an amused smirk earlier, straightened. His expression shifted, not completely, but enough to show his surprise. He had been waiting for her to crumble, but instead he was seeing her rise in a way he never expected. He took a small sip of his drink, though he didn't really want it. He just needed something to do with his hands. The situation was slipping out of his control, and he felt it. Meanwhile, she kept playing. Her mind drifted again, but this time the memories weren't painful. She remembered moments she had forgotten, sitting beside her teacher as a child, trying to keep up with the fast parts while her teacher laughed softly and told her she was improving. She remembered evenings spent practicing until her arms felt heavy, but smiling through it because she loved the music too much to stop. She remembered her mother sitting in the corner of the room, quietly listening, sometimes with her eyes closed, as if the music helped her breathe better. Those were the moments she cherished most. As these memories filled her heart, her playing grew deeper, more emotional. The notes weren't just sounds. They carried pieces of her past. Anyone who listened closely could feel it. The guests began whispering again, but in a different way now. Their voices were quiet, surprised, touched. Some glanced at each other, unsure how to react. They hadn't come to the party expecting something meaningful. They expected music from the speakers, clinking glasses, and polite conversations, not something that made them. Stop and feel something real. One guest near the front leaned over to another and whispered, "She's actually good." Another nodded, eyes still on the piano. More than good. Their reactions didn't reach her ears, but the atmosphere did. She felt the room soften, shift, and settle into a new kind of silence, one filled with respect instead of mockery. The millionaire clenched his jaw slightly. He didn't like losing attention, and right now, all the attention in his own mansion was on someone he had tried to embarrass. He tried to keep his face neutral, but the tension in his hands gave him away. She lifted her hands slightly and continued the melody with more assurance. The third section grew richer, and the room seemed to breathe with each note. She didn't realize it, but she was letting go of the fear she carried for years. With each key she pressed, she released a little piece of the weight inside her chest-old doubts, regrets, and the belief that she had to give up everything she once loved just to survive. Her music didn't erase her struggles, but in that moment, it reminded her she still had something powerful inside her, something she hadn't lost after all. She reached a small break in the melody, a moment where the piece softened into almost nothing. She let her hands rest lightly above the keys again. The room held its breath. If she had been brave enough to look up, she would have seen people standing near the back of the hall, silently watching her with soft expressions. She would have seen the workers standing still, holding trays or napkins, unable to look away from the scene. She would have seen guests leaning on chairs or tables, not wanting to disturb the moment. But she didn't look. She kept her eyes on the keys. A small flicker of fear returned. What if she lost the rhythm again? What if she ruined the moment she accidentally created? Before she could fall back into doubt, she reminded herself of where she started tonight. She came in as someone who didn't want attention, someone who hummed quietly to calm herself, someone who had forgotten how much music meant to her. And yet now, her soft tune had pulled the entire room into silence. The thought gave her strength. She began the next part of the third section, and the sound that followed was stronger, clearer. She didn't rush. She didn't push. She simply played the way she knew she could. With each passing moment, the tension in her body faded. Even her breathing became gentle. Her hands felt lighter, more connected to the keys than they had in years. As she played, her mind grew calmer. She didn't need to prove anything to the millionaire anymore. She didn't need to prove anything to the guests. She was playing for herself. The guests sensed the shift too. Something about her posture, the way her fingers moved, the expression on her face, even though they couldn't see it fully, told them that she wasn't just performing. She was sharing something personal. Music had a way of showing the truth. Even when the musician said nothing. In the corner, near one of the tall windows, a guest shook his head in disbelief. How did he not know she could play like this? He whispered. Another shrugged softly. Maybe he never bothered to look. The millionaire heard that comment. He didn't show his reaction, but it struck him harder than he expected. He had never paid attention to her. She was just another employee doing tasks in the background. He never cared to learn about her past or her talents. And now she was sitting in front of him, proving he didn't know everything. She reached the last part of the third section. The music didn't end loudly. It softened slowly, like a gentle sigh. Her fingers pressed the last key, and the sound drifted through the air, warm and delicate, before fading into silence. This silence felt completely different from the one before she started playing. It wasn't tense. It wasn't filled with expectation. It was filled with something real, something humble, something emotional, something honest. She let her hands fall into her lap. Her shoulders dropped slightly, as if she had been holding her breath during the whole piece. She didn't turn around. She didn't want to break the moment. People looked at her in a way they didn't look at her before, like she mattered. The millionaire finally stepped forward, breaking the silence with a short, stiff clap. It wasn't warm or genuine, but it was something. A few guests joined in politely, but most were still too surprised to react. She didn't move. She stared at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. She couldn't believe what she just did. She came into the night feeling small, invisible, and afraid. But now she felt something stirring inside her, something close to pride. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know how the millionaire would react. She didn't know if the guests would forget this moment by the time they got home. But she did know one thing. She had not been humiliated. She had not failed. She had found a part of herself again. And as she sat there, still on the piano bench, she felt the smallest, quietest spark in her chest, a spark that told her this night was far from over. And something unexpected was still coming, something that would shift everything, something that would change the way. Everyone in the room saw her dot, especially the man who tried to break her confidence. And as the silence stretched on, she felt ready for whatever came next. The moment the next morning's sunlight brushed the glass windows of the mansion, the house felt strangely quiet. It was the kind of quiet that came after a night full of heavy thoughts. The staff moved around softly, almost whispering to each other. They all sensed something different in the air, though none of them spoke openly about it. The young woman woke up early. She didn't sleep much, but she felt clearer than she had the previous night. The emotional storm inside her had calmed down, leaving only a steady determination. She washed her face, combed her hair, and stood for a moment looking at her own reflection. She didn't look stronger, but she felt stronger. And that was enough. Downstairs, the housekeeper greeted her kindly, as if she had been waiting for her. There was no pressure in her voice, just quiet support. The young woman smiled back, grateful. Even small kindness felt big in a place where she had mostly felt out of place. That breakfast was served in a large dining room, but the millionaire wasn't there. Usually he appeared loudly, making his presence known without even trying. Today, the chair at the head of the table was empty. The woman sat down carefully, not sure if she should wait or simply start eating. A moment later, the housekeeper leaned in and whispered that he was outside on the terrace. She nodded and started eating slowly, still thinking about the previous day. She kept replaying the moment she played the piano, the silence that followed, the surprised look on his face. She couldn't tell if he had been angry, impressed, or both. She couldn't tell what came next, and that uncertainty made her uneasy. After breakfast, she took a breath and walked outside. The terrace was wide and bright, with a view of endless green fields. The millionaire stood near the railing, sipping something warm. He didn't look at her immediately, but he knew she was there. He finally turned around, his expression unreadable. She felt herself freeze for a second. "You play well," he said simply. It wasn't praise exactly, just a fact. Still, hearing it from a man who rarely admitted anything softened her fear just a little. "Thank you," she replied quietly. He studied her for a long moment. The silence between them stretched thin, but not in a bad way. More in a way that told her he was thinking deeply about something. "You must be wondering what happens now," he said. She nodded. "A little." He looked back at the fields, as though searching for the right words among the trees. "Last night? It was unexpected. I didn't think you would sit down and actually do it." She swallowed. "You insisted?" He almost smiled, but it disappeared before it fully formed. "Yes, I did." Another pause. Then he continued, "I forced the situation because I thought you were hiding something. I didn't expect it to be something like that." Her heart tightened. She wasn't sure what exactly he meant, but she didn't interrupt. "You surprised everyone," he said. "Including me." The words landed softly, but still carried weight. She lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. He straightened up. I want to see it again. I want to see how you play when you're not under pressure. Her head lifted slightly. She didn't expect that. Not now, he added quickly. But soon. She nodded slowly. She could live with that, Dot. He motioned for her to walk with him. They moved down a stone path that led toward a small garden area. Birds fluttered somewhere above. Leaves rustled in a cool breeze. It was a peaceful setting, very different from the tension of the previous night. What made you learn? He asked after a few steps. She hesitated, not because she didn't want to answer, but because the memories felt heavy. Still, she spoke honestly. I used to watch my neighbor when I was little, she said. He played old songs on a piano in his living room. The window stayed open, and I would sit outside just to listen. One day he saw me and invited me in. He let me touch the keys. That was the first time. I never forgot it. The millionaire listened quietly, hands behind his back. I learned a little from him before he moved away, she continued. Then I taught myself. I played wherever I could. Sometimes in small community halls, sometimes on old pianos that were barely working. But I loved it. Her voice softened. I thought someday I might study it properly. But life doesn't always go the way we hope. She didn't add anything more. She didn't need to. They walked in silence for a moment. The millionaire seemed lost in his own thoughts again, and for once his expression wasn't cold or strict. It was thoughtful. You know, he said finally, most people don't take the time to master something unless they think it will take them somewhere. You didn't seem like you believe your music can take you anywhere. His tone wasn't harsh. More curious, she looked ahead. I don't think about where it takes me. I just play. It makes me feel like I'm still myself. He slowed his pace at her words, as if they touched something inside him. After a moment, he cleared his throat. There's an event tonight. Small gathering. Some friends of mine. Her stomach tightened again. She wasn't sure she liked where this was going. I want you to play there, he said. Her breath caught. Only if you want to, he added. I'm not forcing you again. But it would be interesting. Interesting. She wasn't sure if that word made her feel excited or nervous. She stayed quiet for a moment. The idea of playing in front of strangers made her heart flutter uncomfortably. But part of her also felt drawn to the opportunity. Maybe it wasn't an opportunity exactly, but it was something. I'll think about it, she said softly. Good, he said. He didn't push her. He didn't demand anything. He simply accepted her answer. That alone surprised her more than anything else. The rest of the day passed slowly but calmly. She helped with small tasks around the house, talked softly with the housekeeper, and found herself drifting toward the music room more than once. She stood near the piano, fingertips resting on the cool surface, but she didn't play. Not yet. Later, as evening settled in, she walked outside for some fresh air. The sky had turned warm and golden, with streaks of soft pink spreading across the clouds. She sat on a small bench near the garden and closed her eyes. Listening to the gentle sounds of nature. She thought about her life before the mansion, the things she had lost, the things she still carried inside her. She thought about the piano, about how it always made her feel safe. She thought about the millionaire, who confused her more than anyone she had ever worked for. And she thought about the gathering he mentioned. Was she truly ready to play in front of people? Did she even want to? The more she sat, the more she realized she wasn't afraid of the piano. She was afraid of being seen, of people looking at her the way they did last night, shocked, surprised, curious. She had spent so long shrinking into the background that stepping forward felt like stepping into a spotlight she never asked for. But maybe this was her moment to stop hiding. She opened her eyes slowly. That night, The millionaire didn't call for her, and she didn't approach him. They kept their distance, giving each other space. But something in the mansion felt different. The tension that once filled the halls felt lighter. Before bed, she found herself back in the music room again. The moonlight slipped through the tall windows, resting on the piano like a soft silver cloth. She sat down quietly, letting her hands hover over the keys. Then she began to play, not loudly, not dramatically, just gently. The notes drifted through the air, simple and warm. Each sound carried a piece of her heart, a little more confident than the night before. And somewhere down the hallway, unseen but listening, the millionaire paused. His steps slowed. He said nothing, but the music kept flowing, filling the quiet mansion with a soft, honest truth. Something was changing, and both of them felt it, even if neither could explain it yet. The morning of the gathering arrived with a soft brightness that made the mansion feel less heavy than usual. Sunlight touched the walls gently, and the air held a quiet promise that something important was about to happen. The young woman woke early again, her thoughts full but steady. She knew that by the end of the night, something in her life would shift. Even if she didn't know, how she moved through her morning tasks calmly, though her heart beat a little faster than normal. Every sound seemed louder to her, a clink of dishes, the rustle of fabric, the distant hum of staff preparing the house for guests. Even the house itself felt like it was waiting. The housekeeper noticed her unease and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to play if you're not ready," she said with a warm voice. The young woman nodded, grateful for the comfort. "I know. I just want to try." She didn't say more than that, but the housekeeper smiled, as if she understood everything without needing extra words. By afternoon, the mansion had transformed. Decorations were simple but elegant. Soft lights were arranged around the large sitting area where the guests would gather later. The piano stood in the corner, polished and shining as though it, too, was preparing. The young woman walked past it several times, each time feeling a mix of excitement and fear. It was strange. She had played in front of strangers before, but not here, not under these circumstances, not knowing she was being watched by people who lived in a world far different from her own. Later in the day, she found herself standing near the terrace again, watching the breeze move through the trees. She heard footsteps and turned to see the millionaire approaching. His expression was calm, different from the stern look he usually wore. "Are you ready for tonight?" he asked. She took a breath. "I think so." He nodded slowly. "You don't have to be perfect. Just be honest in what you play." Something in his tone was surprisingly gentle. She gave a small smile, unsure whether he was trying to reassure her or himself. He looked thoughtful for a moment, then added, "If at any point you want to stop, you can. You're not being forced this time." She appreciated that more than he probably realized. Evening arrived quickly. Cars began pulling into the driveway, and guests stepped out dressed in elegant outfits, greeting one another with warm handshakes and polite laughter. The young woman stayed in the background at first, helping the staff while trying not to be noticed. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears as the rooms filled with voices. The millionaire greeted his guests graciously. Although he had a direct, powerful presence, tonight he seemed more relaxed, even friendly. Every so often, his eyes searched for the young woman to make sure she wasn't overwhelmed. She finally approached the piano when the house had settled into comfortable conversation. People mingled, holding small plates of food, sipping drinks, talking about business or travel or recent events. The soft hum of voices blended with the sound of glasses being set down. Her fingers touched the edge of the piano bench. The millionaire noticed and slowly walked toward her. Guests turned their heads curiously, sensing something was about to happen. He lowered his voice so only she could hear. "Whenever you're ready." She gave a small nod, then sat down. The room grew quieter, not because anyone asked for silence, but because the sight of her sitting at the piano captured their attention. Curiosity spread among them. Some remembered the commotion from the previous night, though they didn't know the full story. Others simply wondered who she was and why she was preparing to play. She took a deep breath, placed both hands on the keys, and allowed the room to fade from her mind. Then she began. The first notes were gentle and warm. She chose a simple melody, one she used to play in quiet moments, one that always helped her breathe a little easier. The sound spread softly through the room, touching every corner without demanding anything. Her nervousness slowly melted away. Her fingers flowed naturally, moving with confidence she hadn't felt earlier. Every note carried a piece of her story, her childhood, her struggles, her love for music, the moments she felt invisible, and the moments she felt free. The guests grew still, surprised by the sincerity in her playing. The melody wasn't complex, yet it felt alive. It was honest. It held emotion that couldn't be ignored. She continued, shifting into a second tune that rose and fell like soft waves. The room felt different now. Even the staff paused in their steps, drawn to the gentle sound. The millionaire stood off to the side, watching her silently. His expression had changed completely. Gone was the man who demanded control and expected people to obey simply because of his status. Instead, he looked like someone hearing something he had been missing for a long time. When she reached the final notes, the silence that followed was deep and thoughtful. No one clapped right away. They were too immersed in what they had just heard. Then a single guest stepped forward and said quietly, "That was beautiful." Another nodded. "Truly." Soft murmurs of agreement spread across the room, and finally a gentle wave of applause rose. It wasn't loud or theatrical. It was sincere. The young woman lowered her hands from the keys, her heart full and trembling. She didn't know what she expected, but this gentle appreciation felt overwhelming in the best way. The millionaire approached her slowly, waiting until the guests moved back into their conversations, still talking about her playing but giving her space. "You did well," he said. This time, the words sounded real, not forced, not polite. Real. She smiled softly. "Thank you." He hesitated, as though thinking about something important. "I didn't know music could change a room like that," he said quietly. She looked at him. "Music doesn't change rooms. People do, when they feel something." Her words seemed to touch him deeply. He looked away, almost uncomfortable with how much truth they carried. As the evening continued, several guests approached her with kind words and warm smiles. Some asked where she had learned. Others said her playing reminded them of something they had forgotten, childhood memories, peaceful moments, old dreams. She didn't boast or speak too long. She simply answered humbly, grateful that her music reached them. Later, when the night grew quieter and the last guests were leaving, the millionaire found her again near the terrace. The cool air brushed past them, carrying the faint sound of laughter from the driveway. "You changed tonight," he said. She shook her head softly. "I didn't change. I just stopped hiding." He looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe I'm the one who changed then." She didn't know what to say to that. But he continued, "I judged you without knowing anything about you. I made assumptions. I thought I understood everything just because I had money and power." He paused. "But you reminded me that talent, heart, and dignity aren't things you can measure like that." She stayed quiet, not wanting to interrupt. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. It was the first time he had spoken them to her. She breathed in slowly. "Thank you," she said. "That means something." There was a gentle silence between them. Not tense, not uncomfortable, Just honest. After a moment, he added, "If you ever want to pursue music properly, I could help. Lessons, opportunities, anything you need." She looked into his eyes, searching for the truth, and she found it. He wasn't offering it out of guilt or pride. He was offering it because he finally saw her, not as an employee, not as someone beneath him, but as someone with a gift. "I'll think about it," she said. He nodded, accepting her answer. That night, when she finally returned to her small room, she sat on the edge of her bed and let the emotions wash over her. She didn't know what her future would hold, but she knew something important. She had found her courage again. She had reclaimed a part of herself that she thought she had lost, and her music, once a quiet secret hidden in the corners of her life, had finally reached the world. Outside, the mansion lights dimmed. Inside, she closed her eyes and smiled softly. Tomorrow would come, and she would be ready.